You need to remove that film, Mr. Drex. This is your final warning.
That was Marla Risto, president of the Halcyon Ward's HOA, standing dead center in my front yard, arms crossed, smug as hell. She was flanked by 2 board members who looked more like spectators than supporters. Her voice echoed like she was addressing a child caught coloring on the walls. It's a violation of Section 6B, external modifications. We don't allow mirrored windows here. Behind her, the morning sun reflected off the very window she was pointing at, Lyra's nursery. The film wasn't mirrored. It was a barely visible UV filter designed to block sunlight from my daughter's photosensitivity condition. I'd already submitted the medical paperwork twice. Then, maybe you should stop shining flashlights into it at 3 a.m., I said quietly. Because that camera you didn't notice? It logs every motion. Her eyes flickered. She hadn't expected that. You want more stories like this? Real ones with teeth? Subscribe now. Because what happened next escalated faster than anyone saw coming. I'm Callan Drex. I'm not a lawyer, not a cop, not a loud voice in the crowd. But for 14 years, I reconstructed gunshot evidence for courtrooms, audio trajectories, pressure signatures, angle analysis. And I was done letting a neighborhood tyrant gamble with my daughter's safety. Because this wasn't about rules anymore. It was about control. That UV film, I installed it the day we brought Lyra home from NICU. She was born 8 weeks early, lungs underdeveloped, eyes fragile from oxygen exposure. Her pediatrician warned us, direct sunlight could cause retinal scarring. The nursery had to be kept dim. I even built blackout panels and installed light diffusers behind the curtains. But the film, that soft, almost invisible tint, was the only way to let natural light in without hurting her. And Marla knew that. I'd given her everything. The prescription, the documentation, the hospital record, her response. Medical conditions don't exempt you from visual continuity standards. As if symmetry mattered more than my child's eyes. That nursery window was the last thing I'd fixed before Lyra came home. I sanded and sealed the wood myself, installed the latches with padded guides. And the crib, God, the crib, I built it out of reclaimed pine from my father's old cabin. Every time I walk in there, I see his hands in the grain. That room isn't just a nursery, it's a promise, a shield. And somehow, Marla made it her battlefield. She'd left 3 violations on my door in 2 weeks. 1 for non-standard landscaping because I replaced her ornamental grass with fire-resistant native shrubs. 1 for visible cables because of the solar inverter on the side of my house. And now this, the film. A medical necessity twisted into a neighborhood crime. But even then, even after the fines started, I didn't think she'd go further. I didn't think she'd pull a gun. It happened just after sunrise. Lyra had woken early. I was rocking her beside the window when I heard it. The snap of a trigger, a crack of pressure, and the crash of shattering glass. The sound didn't come from my side of the house. It came from the greenbelt, across the property line, where Marla's deck had a clean line of sight to our window. The bullet tore through the glass, slammed into the crib's side rail, and splintered a piece of the wood I'd carved with my own hands. If I hadn't picked Lyra up seconds earlier, it would have hit her. And when I ran outside, baby in one arm, rage in the other, Marla was still standing there, no gun in hand now, just her phone, filming the aftermath like she was the victim. "You should have complied," she said. "People who hide behind reflective glass are usually hiding something else too." That's when I knew this wasn't over. It was just beginning. The police came quickly, but not quickly enough. By the time the cruiser turned onto Aspen Hollow Drive, Marla had already changed her blouse, pulled her hair into a tight bun, and was standing calmly with a clipboard in hand like she was hosting a bake sale. She didn't even flinch when the officer approached. "I'm the one who called it in," she said smoothly, as if she hadn't just fired a bullet into a child's bedroom. "There was an incident involving suspected domestic unrest. I heard shouting, possibly a struggle. I feared for the safety of the child." The words didn't hit me at first, but when they did, I froze. She was framing me. The officer glanced at me, then at the broken window, then back to Marla. He looked like a man who'd already been given a script. Marla had a way of doing that, laying the foundation for her version of events before anyone else could speak. I watched him scribble something on a yellow notepad as Marla casually mentioned she was head of the Neighborhood Safety Committee. as if that were an actual credential. The moment he asked to speak to me alone, I handed him my ID and said, "Pull the footage." He raised an eyebrow. "Footage? Ring cam, 2 angles. You'll see her walk into her yard at 6:03 a.m. You'll hear the shot at 6:06. No screaming, no struggle, just a bullet." To his credit, the officer did his job. He reviewed the footage while I stood there clutching my daughter against my chest, her tiny fingers curled in my shirt. She had stopped crying by then, but my hands were still shaking, not from fear, from restraint. When he came back out, his expression had changed. Marla was still talking, something about how she feared for community safety and how this man had installed high-tech cameras to spy on people. She only shut up when he asked if she had a concealed carry license. She didn't. When he informed her that the revolver had been confiscated as evidence, she acted offended. "It's a family heirloom," she said. "I've had it since my father passed. I wasn't threatening anyone. I was trying to prevent a tragedy." "You discharged a firearm toward a residence?" he replied. "And if there had been a hostage situation, then what?" Her voice trembled, not with fear, but fury. "We have rules for a reason. I've lived here for 18 years. I know what danger looks like." She looked right at me when she said it. They took her statement. They didn't arrest her, not yet. Apparently she was detained pending investigation, which meant she was allowed to go home as long as she didn't leave the neighborhood. The officer assured me that the case would be escalated, that a detective would follow up, that someone would be in touch. Then he asked me to remain cooperative while the investigation played out. I was cooperative. I gave them the bullet, dug from the crib rail with my own hands. I sent the footage. I signed the incident report. But what stuck with me most wasn't the shattered glass or the scorched pine. It was the way the other neighbors watched from behind their blinds and said nothing. Like this wasn't the first time she'd done something extreme. Just the first time someone caught her. By noon, the HOA violation notices were gone from my door, not removed, collected, neatly peeled from the frame like nothing had happened. I checked the HOA portal. My fine history had been archived for review. The page was locked behind a login error. The security feed on my front porch flickered to black for 6 seconds at 2:17 p.m., a time I hadn't noticed anyone physically approach the house. By the next morning, a new sign had appeared at the community entrance. "Neighborhood Watch in effect, for your protection." It was printed in bold red letters with a logo that looked suspiciously like a sheriff's star, and beneath it, in smaller text, "Enforced by the Halcyon Ward's HOA Committee for Safety Standards and Community Integrity." I stared at it from my car window, baby seat buckled behind me, heat rising up the back of my neck. She wasn't backing down. She was declaring war. Jonas Rell watched the sign go up from his front window. He didn't say anything. He didn't even shift in his recliner, but I know he saw it. His living room light flickered once, always on a timer, always just after sunset, like clockwork. Jonas didn't do surprises. He liked structure, predictability, quiet. That's probably why he never said no when Marla dragged him into HOA politics. He hadn't spoken to me since the shot. Not a call, not a knock, not even a look from his porch across the cul-de-sac. And yet, I knew he was watching. He was always watching. I saw him again the next morning when I stepped outside to retrieve the envelope taped to my door. Another violation. Not from the HOA this time. It was printed on plain white paper in a half-baked Word template. No signature, no board header, just a sentence. "Failure to comply with security revisions may result in community-level response." The only thing more cowardly than an unsigned threat is one with no legal teeth. I scanned the yards. Jonas was watering his roses. One of them wilted under the stream, but he didn't notice. His eyes locked on mine for a second, just long enough to register something. Guilt, maybe. Fear. I couldn't tell. I crossed the street. He didn't stop watering. "You know what that's about?" I asked. He didn't look up. Not officially, but unofficially. He let the water stream over the base of a bush that didn't need it. "Marla called an emergency session last night. No minutes recorded, not on the books. Said we had a neighborhood security risk and needed eyes on the ground. Voted to install motion-activated floodlights facing your property lines." I blinked. "That's harassment. She called it community shielding. Said your camera angles cover too many public sightlines." She's staging the next move, Jonas. His hand tightened on the hose. She didn't say anything about the gun. She won't, because if she admits it happened, she admits liability. You know that. He finally looked at me, and for the first time in 2 years of stiff waves and forced neighborhood hellos, Jonas Rell looked like a man who didn't want to be standing where he was. I didn't vote yes, he said, but you didn't leave the room either. He flinched. There it was. I didn't need him to confess to anything that day. I just needed him to remember who else lived on this street, who else had children, who else could be next. That night, I sat in the nursery and held Lyra close. I counted the splinters still embedded in the crib rail, unwilling to sand them down just yet. Her tiny hand gripped one of my fingers in her sleep, the way she always did. It should have felt peaceful, sacred. It didn't. It felt like a countdown. At 11:03 p.m., 3 floodlights snapped on outside my house, all pointed inward. They lit up the entire front lawn and blasted straight through the living room window. The nursery was spared for now, but I knew that was temporary. I checked the feed. The motion sensors hadn't tripped. The lights weren't triggered. They were activated manually, through a switch or a remote. I filed a report. Nothing came of it. The responding officer said HOA lighting didn't fall under municipal code unless it caused a traffic hazard. No hazard, no violation, no help. The next morning, someone chalked a line on the sidewalk in front of my house. White powder, half washed by the sprinklers, but clear enough to read, "Privacy goes both ways." It was Marla. I didn't have footage. She'd found the one blind spot between 2 camera zones, but I could feel her handwriting in every curve of the letters. I checked Jonas's window again. The blinds didn't twitch, but I knew he saw it, because an hour later, a yellow envelope slid under my front door, not taped, not left in its mailbox, slid. Inside was a copy of the HOA's treasury ledger from the last quarter, 4 line items marked discretionary neighborhood improvements, each tagged security. None of them signed. One was dated 2 days before the bullet hit my window, and at the bottom, scribbled in unfamiliar handwriting, I can't say it out loud, but I didn't vote for this. Jonas had spoken, quietly, cowardly, but he had spoken. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. By the end of the week, I was receiving violations for things I didn't even own. A kayak I never bought, a backyard fire pit I hadn't installed, a garden gnome that didn't exist. Each notice came with a fine. Each fine came with a warning, and each warning came with a barely veiled threat about non-compliance resulting in escalated community enforcement. It wasn't paperwork anymore. It was psychological warfare. I documented everything: photos, timestamps, internal security footage. But none of it stopped the slow burn Marla had lit beneath my doorstep. Her campaign had shifted from legality to optics. She wasn't trying to win a case. She was trying to rewrite reality until everyone believed I was the problem. Then came the drone. It was small, civilian grade, no markings. It hovered 30 feet up, barely audible over the wind, but unmistakably watching. I saw it the first time while I was bottle feeding Lyra near the window. What was left of it anyway? The glass had been replaced, but the outline of the impact still haunted the frame, a shallow groove where the pine had splintered. I hadn't fixed it yet. I needed the scar. The drone hovered for 6 minutes, pivoted once, then disappeared over the roofline toward the eastern end of the neighborhood, Marla's street. I checked my security feed. Sure enough, 3 different angles caught it, circling just beyond the property line. It never crossed directly over my house. It didn't have to. It was there to be seen, to remind me that even my airspace wasn't mine anymore. I forwarded the footage to local law enforcement. The officer on the other end gave a tired sigh. It's not illegal unless it enters your property line or records inside the home, and unless you can prove that, I built half the state's gunfire triangulation system, I said. You want me to pull in trajectory data and prove that drone's lens was on my child's crib? Because I will. He paused. I'm just telling you what the report will say. I'm telling you what the evidence will. The next night, I saw floodlights go up on 2 other homes. Not just motion triggered this time, fixed mounts with manual controls, pointed toward the west, which just so happened to be my direction. Jonas's house was one of them. I watched from my driveway as a contractor finished drilling the bolts. Jonas stood behind his screen door, silent, unmoving. I didn't approach him. I didn't need to. If he was going to stand behind glass and pretend none of this was happening, I'd leave him in the quiet he clearly craved. But I wasn't staying quiet. I took the drone footage, I mapped its height, angle, and rotation axis. I cross-referenced it with reflective flare off the second window's remaining safety tint, and overlaid it onto a floor plan of my house. Then I synchronized that with the timestamp of Lyra's bottle alarm, sound-based data, time-coded to the millisecond, and lined them up with the camera pan. The result was terrifying. The drone had adjusted position mid-hover, not for the house, not for the yard. It had adjusted for the crib. That was all I needed. I packaged the evidence into a compressed file and encrypted it, then uploaded a copy to a secure server. I added a failsafe. If anything happened to me or Lyra, the file would release to a list of pre-approved journalists and legal contacts, including one name Marla wouldn't see coming, my brother, Tavian Drex, state attorney for the Northern District. I hadn't called him yet. I'd promised myself I'd keep him out unless it got personal. It was personal now, because at 2:14 a.m., the drone came back. This time, it hovered lower. This time, I heard the soft hum just outside the baby monitor's range, and this time, I didn't just record it. I aimed a laser pointer through the blackout curtain directly into the drone's camera and watched it jolt backward like it had been slapped. Not illegal, just noticed. Let them write me up for that. I was done waiting for someone to save us. I didn't sleep, not after the drone, not after the laser. I sat on the nursery floor with Lyra in my lap, her tiny breaths rising and falling against my chest, while the hum of the outside world kept circling just out of sight. At 3:12 a.m., I finally stood, put her down in her bassinet, and turned on the rig. My old workstation was a stripped-down version of what I used to run at the state lab, just enough for audio isolation, trajectory modeling, and spectrum overlay. But that night, it became the center of something bigger, something sharp. I pulled the feeds from the drone's second visit. 3 sources, ring cam, streetlight audio reflection, and a neighbor's chime system that picked up ultrasonic interference. Most people didn't know those doorbells logged environmental noise beyond human hearing. I knew. I used to build prosecution timelines from whisper fragments and pressure rebounds. So, this wasn't new. I triangulated the drone's flight path by measuring sound delay across the 3 recordings. Even with ambient noise, I could identify the prop pulse and match its change in tone as it hovered and shifted. At 2:14:27, it dipped lower. At 2:14:35, it hovered directly over the east corner of my roof. At 2:14:40, it adjusted, just slightly, to the left. My software mapped the deviation. 7 degrees downward, 4 degrees south, right at the window. I froze the spectrogram, pulled a frame from the ring cam, and overlaid the 2. The drone hadn't just been floating, it had focused. Next, I isolated the audio gain spike. There was no spoken sound from inside the house at that time. Lyra had been asleep, I'd been silent, but the waveform suggested a directional microphone sweep. Someone had been listening. That was the turning point. Up until then, I could have convinced myself I was just the target of petty HOA harassment. Fines, signs, a gunshot that might be chalked up to insanity. But this was surveillance. They weren't just watching us. They were building a case. At 5:41 a.m., I called Tavian. He picked up on the second ring. It happened again? It's escalating, I said. I need eyes on this that don't live on this street. He was silent for a beat. You want me to act as family or as state? Both. I sent the files. 15 minutes later, he called back. I'm flagging this to the task force, he said. We're treating it as unauthorized aerial surveillance. If we can match that drone to a purchase account or log its flight path through FAA mapping, we've got jurisdiction. And if the HOA paid for it, even better. They did, I said. Jonas gave me a ledger, 4 payments for security improvements. No specs, but the timeline fits. I'll need that. Sworn statement? Not from him. Not yet. Tavian sighed. Then get me something cleaner. I'm working on it. After the call, I pulled up the drone's visual distortion and marked where the sun flare struck the lens. It revealed something I hadn't noticed before. A brief flash off the back of the drone, metallic, rounded. A housing tag. I zoomed. Serial number. partially obscured, but enough for an ID. I cross-referenced it through open-source drone registries. There it was, purchased through a reseller in Oregon. Shipping destination, Halcyon Ward's Community Admin Office. Signed for, by M. Risto. That was my clean link. No speculation, no guesswork, no hearsay. She ordered it. She owned it. She flew it. I backed up the data to 3 secure drives. 1 stayed in the house. 1 went to a safety deposit box under Lyra's name. And 1 would be handed off in person to Tavian when the time was right. I didn't contact Marla, didn't issue a warning, didn't file another complaint. I wanted her to think I was tired, pushed back, intimidated. I wanted her to believe she'd won, because she was still moving like a queen on a board no one else could see. But she hadn't noticed the other player lining up a checkmate, and I wasn't playing defense anymore. The letter came on a Tuesday. Plain envelope, no return address, hand-delivered and shoved through the mail slot without a sound. I found it on the floor by the front door after putting Lyra down for her morning nap. Inside, a single sheet of paper, 1 sentence. CPS has been alerted to unsafe parenting practices at your address. No signature, no accusation, just the suggestion of danger. They didn't need to say it out loud. The implication was the weapon. By noon, they showed up. 2 people. A woman in her 40s with a clipboard and the polite but frozen smile of someone trying to make it through their shift without crying. Her partner was younger, male, in training probably, silent, observant, eyes darting to every corner of my house like he'd been told to find something I'd hidden. I let them in. I had nothing to hide. They asked the questions. How often was Lyra fed? Where did she sleep? Was she ever left alone? Did I have outside childcare? Why was the nursery window reinforced? Why was there surveillance in the hallway? Had I ever displayed volatility in front of her? And I answered everything, calm, measured. But inside, I was shaking, not from fear, from fury. Because this was Marla's real play. The drone was intimidation. The signs were noise. The violations were smoke. But this was the knife. If they found anything, they could open a case. That alone was enough to leave a mark on my record. A red flag on every school enrollment form, every custody hearing, every background check. Even unfounded, it would follow me. And Marla knew it. After they left, I sat in the nursery again, staring at the hole in the crib side rail like it was an open wound. I hadn't filled it in. I didn't want to. It reminded me what she'd done, what she was willing to do. But now it reminded me of something else. She wasn't afraid of me, because she didn't think I had teeth. She thought I was just a man with a baby and a sad story, and no allies. Someone she could pressure and paper cut into submission. Someone who would eventually move out, quietly, without ever raising his voice. She didn't know what was coming. That night, I rewired the network, not just the cameras, everything. I split the feeds, synced them to backup drives, programmed them to send automatic pings to Tavian's cloud server if a motion event triggered while I was offline. Then I went to the garage, not for documents, not for records, for tools. I pulled the laser angle finder from my old kit, a small, precise device I hadn't touched since I left the state job. I hadn't needed it until now. I climbed onto the roof at 2:07 a.m., not to spy, not to escalate, to measure. I traced the drone's second path using the data from the ring cam's light bloom. I checked the angles, tracked the curvature, and mapped the focal convergence, where the camera would have needed to be to capture a clear view through Lyra's blackout curtain. There was only one angle that worked, only one position that matched all 3 data points, and it required a planned hover, not random, not incidental, intentional. I annotated every result, time code, elevation, flight path, rotation degrees. Then I sent it to Tavian. 10 minutes later, he responded with a single sentence. "That's enough. I'm filing a state escalation." I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. It was done. It was real. There was no taking it back. If she thought CPS was her last weapon, she was wrong. She had no idea what it meant to push someone trained to trace bullets through walls, to sync sound through brick, to stitch stories out of vibrations and echoes. She thought she was dealing with a homeowner, but I'd spent my life rebuilding the truth from the lies people fired into the dark. And now, the system she thought she controlled was about to turn its lights on. Jonas Rell knocked on my door just before midnight. I hadn't seen him approach, no porch light, no shuffle across the driveway. Just the knock, 3 short raps, then silence. I opened the door slowly, not sure what to expect. He stood there in a worn gray hoodie, clutching a manila envelope like it might catch fire if he let go. "I don't have long," he said. "She thinks I'm at my sister's." I let him in. He didn't sit, just hovered near the kitchen island, eyes darting like he expected someone to burst in and drag him away for treason. I didn't rush him, I just watched. "She's losing control," he finally said, voice low. "But that makes her worse. Paranoid. She started locking the meeting notes, won't let me see the final drafts. Starts talking about neighborhood stability like it's a national security issue." "What changed?" He hesitated, then looked at me. "Your brother." I didn't answer. "She knows, or she suspects. Someone from the county clerk's office let it slip. Said the state attorney's office requested preliminary filings for HOA misconduct. She's panicked. She held a board call yesterday. Said if the neighborhood lost its status, property values would collapse. That your house was the tipping point." I felt my jaw tighten. "She thinks if she pushes you out quietly, the pressure goes away. No scandal, no oversight." Jonas slid the envelope across the counter. Inside were 5 printed documents, internal emails, HOA messaging logs, a receipt. The first email was from Marla to the board. "We need to position Mr. Drex as unstable. CPS visit was a good start. I'm working on coordinating an anonymous tip to animal control next. He has a dog, right?" I didn't. The second was worse. A message to a private list of Community Watch volunteers, suggesting that if forced defensive action would be justified under the Castle Doctrine if Mr. Drex retaliates. She was laying the groundwork for a confrontation. A preemptive narrative. "She's unhinged," I muttered. "She's desperate," Jonas said, "and she's dragging all of us with her." The final item in the envelope was a receipt for the drone. Officially logged as a mobile inspection unit for landscape surveillance. Signed off by Marla, co-signed by Jonas. I looked up at him. He didn't blink. "I signed it," he said. "Didn't know what it was for. She said it was to enforce weed violations. I didn't ask questions. I should have. Why are you here now?" He swallowed hard. "Because if she pushes this further, if something happens to your daughter, to you, I'm not going to be the man who knew and stayed silent. I've been that man before. I won't do it again." There was something in his voice then. Not fear, not shame, history. But I didn't press. Instead, I opened the drawer under the island and pulled out the hard copy of the drone analysis. The triangulation data. The serial number, trace. The mapped audio overlay. I handed it to him. "Give this to no one but Tavian Drex," I said. "He's expecting it." Jonas took it slowly, like it weighed more than paper. "She'll know it was me." "She probably already does." He nodded once, more to himself than to me. Then he turned to leave. At the door, he paused. "You built that crib yourself?" "Yes." He hesitated. "I noticed the carving. My dad was a carpenter. Used to say you could tell a man's state of mind by the tightness of his dovetails." I looked past him, toward the nursery. "They're cracked now," I said. "Shot blew out the corner rail." Jonas didn't say anything for a moment. Then he stepped out into the night. I closed the door behind him and bolted it, every lock clicking into place like punctuation. I didn't know if Jonas was brave or just too tired to keep pretending. But I knew one thing. The moment he handed that packet off, the game changed. No more whisper campaigns. No more coded threats. It would be evidence now. It would be law. Tavian arrived in person 48 hours later. He didn't wear a suit, didn't bring an entourage, just khakis, a zip-up windbreaker, and a thin black laptop case. He stepped out of a nondescript state vehicle and nodded once as I opened the front door. No greetings, no pleasantries. He walked past me and straight into the living room like we'd been syncing strategy our whole lives. "I filed the preliminary notice of investigation this morning," he said. "Sent copies to the county recorder, the civil litigation unit, and the ethics board that oversees HOA compliance. You'll start seeing ripples by the weekend." I handed him the envelope Jonas had brought. He took it silently, opened it, scanned the contents, then folded it back together with clinical care. "This confirms it," he said. We'll classify the drone incident under unauthorized surveillance with minor child exposure. That's enough for civil liability. But what matters more is that receipt. Proves the HOA paid for it using member funds, with no formal vote. That crosses into misuse of communal assets. He sat on the edge of the couch, resting his elbows on his knees. She's going to know this came from you. She already does. He glanced toward the hallway, where Lyra's monitor glowed faint blue. You need to prepare? I already am. Tavian reached into his laptop case and pulled out a printed sheet, state letterhead, gold seal in the top corner. This is your official affidavit, notarized, signed. It locks in your claim timeline. You'll be protected as a state witness if this goes to criminal proceedings. I didn't touch it. He leaned in. This isn't optional, Cal. Once the subpoenas hit the HOA board, they're going to spin this every way they can. You need to be ahead of them. I'm not afraid of them. You should be afraid for her. I didn't ask who he meant. The truth was I'd already moved Lyra's crib away from any window. I'd already swapped out the blackout curtains for ballistic film, already reinforced the nursery door with a concealed hinge guard. My house didn't look different, but it was. It had become a fortress. Tavian stood and paced once. We've identified the vendor for the drone system, small outfit based in Utah. They sold 3 identical units to community organizations in the last 6 months. 2 of them filed insurance claims afterward. Harassment, boundary violations, intimidation suits. She's not the first. No, he said, but she might be the last if this plays out publicly. I watched him close the laptop case. What are you not saying? He paused. The board is trying to get ahead of it. Marla's already submitted a motion to dissolve the current safety committee and rebrand it as a Neighborhood Stabilization Task Force. Different name, same tactics. They'll deny everything else. He set the case down beside him. I want to run a press leak, get in front of the narrative, let the public see what's happening before she sanitizes the record. No? Why not? Because I want her comfortable. I want her certain that we're staying quiet. When this breaks, I want it to bury her, not give her a chance to pivot. Tavian studied me. You've changed. I didn't reply. He nodded once and picked up the case again. All right, we'll do it your way. I'll start the quiet filing process, discreet subpoenas, silent compliance checks. Then when we've got the final audit from the Treasury records, she'll know then. Good, he said. Let her. I walked him to the door. The street was quiet, no signs of motion, but I could feel the cameras watching. He turned before stepping off the porch. You should know. CPS closed the file, unsubstantiated, no follow-up required. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. She never filed it, he added. It came from a burner phone, traced back to an HOA-funded data plan used by a volunteer security assistant, likely a proxy. He paused. But I'll find her link. You always do. He gave me a look only brothers share, part warning, part promise, and then he left. I stood there for a long time. After the car disappeared, the wind shifted once. A dog barked somewhere 2 streets over, and from the shadows near Marla's house, a floodlight flicked on. It didn't aim at my home this time. It aimed at the sky. She knew something was coming, but not what. I waited until dusk before moving, not because I was afraid, but because I needed the cover of quiet. Halcyon wards at night was a strange kind of silence, manufactured, manicured. Lights on timers, sprinklers set to whisper. Neighbors trained to ignore anything that disrupted the illusion of peace. That silence worked for me now. Marla's house sat on the eastern curve of the block, 3 properties down from the retention pond, and 1 over from the community watch kiosk she had personally erected. Her windows were always dark, blinds drawn, but her garage light burned like a signal tower, not for safety, for surveillance. She wanted people to know she was watching. Good. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't going to her door. I was going to the HOA community office, a converted pool house behind the clubhouse, where most residents thought the board just filed landscaping complaints and ordered annual barbecue flyers. But Jonas had told me more. That's where she stored everything. The keys were supposed to be restricted. Only Marla and the vice president were listed on the HOA charter as authorized to enter. But Jonas had slipped me his fob card under a gardening catalog that afternoon. No words exchanged, no questions asked. I walked the path around the tennis courts, sticking to the shadowed side of the bushes. The card reader blinked red once as I approached. I swiped. Green. The door unlocked with a soft thunk. Inside, the air smelled of dry paper and slow rot. The lights were dim, motion sensitive. I kept them off. I knew where I was going. Jonas had drawn a crude map on the back of the ledger copy. Bottom cabinet, left side, below the coffee supplies. I found it. A locked drawer, steel, combination code. Jonas hadn't known it, but the lock wasn't complicated. Standard 4-pin dial. I pulled out a small tension wrench and rake tool from my keyring, the kind you keep not for crime, but for emergencies. Or, in my case, for truth. Took me 45 seconds. Inside, a folder, thick, marked in red. Sharpie, Drex file. I didn't touch it, not yet. Instead, I opened my phone, angled the camera, and started recording. Every page, every note, every timestamp. I wanted a digital copy before I ever laid hands on the contents. Inside were dozens of printouts, screenshots from my front door cam, photos of Lyra's window, multiple versions of HOA violation templates with modified language, the CPS report, unfiled but pre-written, a checklist of community response stages, next to a flowchart titled Optics Control Plan. This wasn't HOA protocol, this was counterinsurgency. And at the bottom, clipped to the last page, was a receipt. Private security, consultation, 3 weeks old, paid in full from the HOA's emergency maintenance budget. The vendor, a corporate firm specializing in civil containment strategies for residential communities facing high-risk residents. They had tagged me as a liability. I shut the folder, placed it exactly as I found it, locked the drawer, reset the dials, backed away. And then I planted the bait. A USB stick, empty shell, no data. Just a fingerprint-activated tripwire. If plugged into any computer, it would ping my server, a digital calling card. I left it on the desk beside the coffee maker, right next to an open HOA invoice form, plausible deniability. Let her think someone got sloppy. Let her investigate the wrong ghost. I slipped out the back, followed the hedge line, and re-entered my property from the north side, avoiding my own cameras. I wasn't just collecting data anymore. I was setting the board. Back inside, I uploaded the footage to 3 encrypted servers and sent the access codes to Tavian with the subject line. Phase 2, confirmed. He responded less than a minute later. Subpoenas signed, financial audit authorized. You've done enough. Let it move. I set the phone down and walked into Lyra's room. She was asleep, peaceful, unaware. I stood there in the dark, watching her breathe. The glow of the repaired monitor cast soft shadows across the crib rail, the one I hadn't replaced, the one with the gouge still running along its side, a mark of violence, now a marker of what was coming, because Marla thought the laws she twisted would protect her, but the evidence she archived would burn her first. The subpoenas landed 3 days later, not quietly, not behind closed doors. Tavian made sure they arrived like thunder, served in person, mid-meeting, right in the heart of the community clubhouse during one of Marla's monthly neighborhood unity briefings. She was halfway through a slideshow about perimeter hedge regulations when a plainclothes investigator handed her the envelope. She tried to play it cool, didn't even pause the slideshow, just tucked the envelope under her clipboard like it was a newsletter she'd read later. But her eyes told the truth. They flicked quick and sharp to each board member in the room, and then to the door. She didn't finish the presentation. Tavian didn't come that day. He didn't have to. His signature was already stamped on every document inside those envelopes. Orders to produce full financial records, HOA correspondence logs, vendor contracts, and any surveillance-related expenses tied to the community's security subcommittee over the last 18 months. That was the nail. The hammer was still falling. Jonas told me what happened after the meeting. Marla didn't go home. She pulled the vice president and one other board member into her car and drove straight to the HOA office. Stayed there for 2 hours, door locked, blinds drawn. When she left, she was carrying 3 heavy folders and a flash drive clipped to a leather strap on her bag. Jonas tried to follow. She saw him, didn't speak, just narrowed her eyes and drove off. She didn't know that I'd already seen what she was trying to hide. She didn't know that Jonas had copied the treasury records before she ever knew he was watching. That night, my house was quieter than usual. No floodlights, no drone, no chalk messages on the sidewalk. Even the wind felt still. It was the kind of stillness that only comes when someone's trying too hard not to be seen. Lyra was asleep early. Her fever had finally broken. Just a touch of the seasonal bug, nothing serious. But even a low-grade temperature made me feel like the walls were closing in. I sat in the living room, watching the monitors flick by, one camera at a time. At 2:11 a.m., I saw motion. Not in my yard, not near the nursery, behind the HOA office. A figure in dark clothes, hood up, hands full. They reached the back door, tried the knob, locked. Then they bent down and pulled something from their coat. Not a crowbar, a key. The door opened, I grabbed my phone, snapped a photo from the feed, and zoomed in. It wasn't Marla, it was the HOA vice president, Anthony Glenwright. The one who always stood behind her at meetings, nodding along, never speaking unless called on. He was carrying what looked like 2 thick binders and a cardboard box. I watched him disappear inside. He didn't turn on the lights. I waited 10 minutes, then checked the hallway cam. Nothing. 20 more. Still nothing. At 2:43, he came back out empty-handed. He looked up once, right into the lens, and smiled, not wide, not smug, resigned, like he knew someone had finally pressed record. He walked away. 30 minutes later, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. Subject: you should have these before they disappear. Attached: a compressed folder of PDFs. I opened it. HOA purchase records, surveillance maintenance logs, emails between Marla and a third-party tech firm about calibration of motion sensors near specific addresses, including mine. Every page time-stamped, every file authentic. Every step of the campaign against me laid out like a blueprint. It wasn't just misconduct, it was calculated targeting. And the HOA had funded all of it. By the time the sun rose, I had already sent the files to Tavian. He responded at 7:14 a.m. with a single message. Final hearing date set, civil liability review will be public. Make sure you're ready. I closed the laptop and walked outside. The street was empty, but something had shifted. For the first time since Marla fired that shot, I didn't feel like I was behind a wall. I felt like I'd kicked one down. The reckoning wasn't coming. It was already scheduled. They held the hearing in the Halcyon Ward's community center, under the same vaulted ceiling where Marla once gave HOA safety lectures and handed out flyers about visual harmony and neighborhood trust. This time, there was no slideshow, no clipboard, just folding chairs, 2 lawyers, and nearly 50 residents packed wall to wall. Tavian arrived 5 minutes before it started, quiet, composed, suit press sharp. He walked straight to the front without a glance sideways. I stood beside him, my files already organized by timestamp and chain of custody. This wasn't a trial, not yet. It was a public liability hearing, a formal process where the HOA board would have to respond to the subpoenas, admit or deny the financial records, and address the evidence now entered into state inquiry. Marla arrived last. She wore a navy pantsuit and a controlled smile, but she didn't look at anyone. Not the residents whispering along the back wall, not the parents who used to wave at her during school drop-off, not Jonas, who sat near the exit with his arms folded and his jaw locked. Her eyes were fixed forward, like she was walking into a storm she still believed she could out-talk. She took her seat at the defendant's table, her attorney already waiting. A man in an expensive suit with the forced confidence of someone who hadn't seen all the evidence yet. He would. The moderator, a state-appointed compliance officer, opened the session, laid out the format, announced the charges being reviewed: misuse of HOA funds, unauthorized surveillance, unlawful data storage, and reckless endangerment stemming from the firearm discharge incident. That last one landed like a body blow. Marla blinked. The attorney objected immediately, claiming the firearm event was irrelevant to financial review. Tavian leaned in and laid out a sequence of receipts and emails, time-stamped, verified, cross-referenced with drone vendor records. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The document spoke louder than outrage. First came the drone invoice, labeled as Mobile Perimeter Inspection Device. Then the surveillance grid map with my property highlighted. Then the HOA's discretionary fund log, 4 payments spread over 6 months. Finally, the private security contract, labeled Risk Management Advisory Services. Tavian read the last line aloud. Client is advised to utilize protocol escalation only upon situational confirmation of adversarial subject. Then he looked at me. I stood and walked to the projector screen where a photo of Lyra's crib, shattered rail, splintered pine, bullet groove intact, faded in with a soft click. Silence. Marla shifted. I played the audio file next. A side-by-side of 3 doorbell cams synced with the drone's ultrasonic hum. Overlaid with sound spectrum mapping, the room filled with the quiet, unnerving pulse of rotors hovering just outside a child's window. Click. I switched to the final frame, the drone's lens flare catching the edge of the window trim. 7 degrees down, I said. 4 degrees south, direct line of sight to the crib. The moderator turned to Marla. Do you deny authorizing the purchase? Her lawyer began to answer, but she interrupted. I approved it, yes, as a deterrent, for community safety. Were you aware it was being used to monitor a private residence? Her jaw tightened. That window was non-compliant. He refused to remove the tinting. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone near the back whispered, "It was medical." The moderator cleared his throat. Ms. Risto, you are not currently facing criminal charges. However, the state attorney has forwarded this hearing's contents to civil review. You may invoke counsel at any time. Marla's hands twitched in her lap. Jonas stood. I have something to add. The moderator allowed it. Jonas walked to the front and placed a signed statement on the table. This is a ledger I copied 3 months ago. Before any of this went public, I was treasurer. I didn't know what she was using the funds for until I saw the drone footage. And I want it on record. I didn't vote for this. I didn't approve this. And I'm sorry I didn't speak sooner. Then he looked at me and bowed his head. The room stayed silent as the moderator accepted the statement into the record. Then he spoke. This hearing is now concluded. State auditors will begin immediate review. A decision on dissolution of the current board will follow within 10 business days. Additional findings may be forwarded to criminal investigation. He banged the gavel once. Marla stood slowly. The lawyer whispered something to her. She didn't respond, just looked around the room that used to obey her, and saw, for the first time, no one looking back. When the board was officially dissolved, no one cheered, no applause, no celebration. Just the sound of papers being signed and chairs scraping against the tile floor of the community center. It wasn't victory in the loud sense. It was quieter, heavier, the kind of silence that meant the truth had finally settled, too real for clapping. I didn't stay for the cleanup. I stood outside on the curb, watching people file out, each carrying a different version of the story home with them. Some avoided my eyes. Others nodded in quiet acknowledgement. A few stopped to squeeze my shoulder, their looks saying what words couldn't. We all lived under her rules for too long, and it showed. Marla left last. No entourage, no clipboard. Just a thin folder in one hand and her lawyer muttering something about appeals. She didn't look at me when she passed, but she slowed down, just enough for the air to change between us. You think this fixes anything? She said under her breath. You think they'll thank you when property values drop, when crime moves in? Crime's been here, I said. It just wore your badge. Her jaw flexed once before she walked away. She didn't look back, not even when the news van lights hit her face. Tavian was waiting at the edge of the parking lot, speaking to a reporter who kept asking the same question. Will there be criminal charges? He didn't answer directly, just said, The evidence speaks for itself. Justice takes time, but it's already moving. Then he looked at me and nodded. His part was done. Mine too. By that evening, the story was everywhere. Local news ran it under the headline, HOA President under state investigation for misuse of funds, unauthorized surveillance. Photos of the drone, the window, the crib. They blurred Lyra's name. That small kindness meant more than I could say. Jonas came by that night. He didn't come inside, just stood on the porch, holding a wooden box. You should have this, he said. Inside was the original crib rail, the one with the bullet groove. I hadn't realized he'd taken it for evidence documentation. Thought you might want it back. I traced my fingers along the split wood. The scar was still there, clean and sharp. It's strange, I said. Something so small can hold so much hate. Jonas shook his head. Or so much proof. He left without another word. I carried the rail into the nursery and set it against the wall near the crib. Lyra was asleep again, her tiny hand curled around the edge of her blanket. The repaired rail glowed faintly in the nightlight, polished smooth where the bullet had struck. I left it that way, not as a wound, but as memory. A mark that the worst had happened, and we had survived. Over the next week, the neighborhood changed. The floodlights came down. The fake security signs were removed. The HOA website vanished. In its place, a new committee formed. A temporary one, built on volunteers, not control. Jonas chaired the first meeting. They voted to require transparency in every expenditure, every rule change. No private emails, no late-night violations. Real neighbors, not petty tyrants. And me? I stayed. Not because I loved the house, though I did, but because leaving would have meant she won. This was where Lyra took her first breath, where my father's wood still lived in the furniture, where the truth had cracked glass and still let light through. A week after the hearing, Tavian called. "You can stand down," he said. "They're moving forward with a permanent injunction. She won't serve on any board again." "Will she face trial?" "Eventually, but that's not your job anymore." "Yeah," I said. "I know." But I didn't hang up right away. I just listened to the silence on the other end, the kind that only comes after a long fight when justice isn't loud, just done. After the call, I went outside. The night was still, the kind of still I hadn't felt since before it all began. The air smelled of rain and cut grass. I sat on the porch steps, the same ones where I'd once stood holding Lyra in shaking arms, glass at my feet and smoke in my lungs. Now, there was nothing but peace. The sound of a baby monitor hummed. Through the open window, a soft cry, then quiet again. I smiled. The world had turned. The noise had finally stopped. And for the first time, the silence didn't feel like fear. It felt like freedom. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Trust me, you'll feel this one. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if it were your window?